Thank you so much, Henry. That was an amazing start to the day. I hope I can follow the energy that you've brought to the table today. Very excited to be moderating this session this afternoon. I welcome everyone to today's discussion and workshop. Thank you to African Communication Week for making this happen. This is truly a necessary effort by everyone within the ecosystem to be a part of. As Eniola earlier mentioned, the theme of this year's African Communication Week is Borderless Africa. And the focal point of this workshop will just sort of be looking at the narratives, like Harry Bernard summarized it. We're looking at the problem. In the first half, we're looking at some solutions and how to work around it in the second half. I'm not going to take too much of your time because each panelist today is going to delve into things that are going to engage in the problem and also in the solution. So we have 3 panelists on the first topic, which is understanding prevailing narratives on investments in Africa. Why is this topic important? We need to understand what it means to us as an entire community, not just as it relates to Africa, what investing looks like, what it means to us, and what the lack of investments will do to us. And to anchor this conversation, we have 3 amazing panelists. We have Arthur Minsat, he is the head of unit, Europe, Middle East, and Africa, or OECD Development Center. And today, Arthur will be sharing insights on the report that has been put together painstakingly. And he'll be giving us the highlights. And for all those that are interested, the link will be available for you to delve into the report some more later. We'll also be listening to Natasha Kimani, who is the head of partnership and research from Africa No Filter. Lovely to have you today, Natasha. She is promising to bring a lot of energy around the narratives of why don't we understand the agreements we've gone into? Why can't we understand the opportunities that are out there for us? We need to be able to draw all those things in. And lastly, but by no means the least, Nadia Koulibaly, who will be talking to us about the realities on ground on how good and feasible investments in Africa is. She's going to take us through a journey where she's going to explain to us the long-term benefits of investing in Africa today and the viability of investing in Africa today. So no further ado, I'm going to allow Arthur start. Arthur Minsat is going up first with his report, and then we'll delve into the conversation. So over to you, Arthur.
Thank you so much, Tomilayo. It's delightful to be here with so many old friends and new friends. So I'm very happy to be here and be able to discuss some of the new and yet unpublished findings of the new flagship report of the African Union Commission, together with the OECD Development Center, called the Africa's Development Dynamics. So it's a courtesy of the African Union, and I'm grateful to our partners and colleagues there who could not join us, but are together with us in spirit, while I will be presenting some of the key messages from the report. First, I will share my screen as I have some visual elements. I'd like to make sure if you could confirm, Tomilayo, whether you can see my screen with the PowerPoint.
Yes, I can. It is clear. I'd like to confirm with my audience if everyone can see the PowerPoint presentation as well. With a thumbs up. Thank you, Henry. So you can go ahead. It's very clear.
Excellent. So my presentation will focus on 2 main issues. One is why is investment important today? What can we do about it? And how can communication help? What are the key issues for investors? So first, in this new report, we estimated what is a sustainable financing gap for the African continent as a whole. We took an OECD and an UNCTAD methodology to estimating this gap at about 7% of the continent's GDP in 2021. And that means that the African continent needs $272 billion annually every year between now and 2030 to bridge this gap. And meaning gap for sustainable financing means economic sustainability, social sustainability, and environmental sustainability in order to achieve the African Union's Agenda 2063, as well as the Sustainable Development Goals. To give you an idea on the environmental side, between 2019 and 2020, we had only 11 billion in climate financing that went to climate adaptation, whereas it's significantly less than the amount needed, which are about 53 billion US dollar annually. So the gap is important, it is sizable, but it can be bridged together, and communicators can help bridge that gap. It appears that this gap is equivalent to about 0.2% of global stocks of assets under management. And if we look only at African held stocks of assets under management, it's 10.5%. So looking at only the African assets would be sufficient to bridge that sustainable financing gap. I think it's very important to bear it in mind because the resources are available, they are there, it's a matter of allocation. Secondly, you will see that we are in a difficult, complex, turbulent global macroeconomic context today. You first see on the green area that global greenfield foreign direct investment, so new investment projects pledged on an annual basis globally, have really suffered from a global crisis. Between 2018 and 2020, we've seen a drastic fall in global foreign direct investment globally. And this has largely benefited, as you can see in the blue line, the high-income countries. High-income countries who attracted 63% of total global FDI in 2021. And the African continent has really suffered from it. As you can see in the largest red line, investment has plateaued, but also as a share of the total, of course, but has also even decreased at about 6% of the total compared to 15% for developing Asia and 10% for Latin America. This represents the lowest share in 17 years since 2004. So there are important risks and challenges today. What are the main constraints here? The main constraints are, according to a survey that we conducted with investors and businesses, are first the perception of risks. And the most important risks are macroeconomic risks first, highly or somewhat important according to most investors, but also political risks are really important. And here, as an example, we have seen with the country credit ratings and higher vulnerability today that the average the spread on an average African Eurobond has reached a 15 years high at about 12% in September, which is higher than in 2008 during the financial crisis or in 2020 during the COVID-19 crisis. So we're really facing unprecedented challenges today with regards to investment and debt management. So the core issue is the limited availability of data that is pervasive and hindering assessments and mitigation strategies for foreign investment. And as a result, we have many risks are perceived, but may not correspond to the real risks really happening on the continent. As an example, what we have seen is that a foreign direct investment has been volatile, but intra-African foreign direct investment has been much more resilient than African in the continent from non-African partners. It has been 3 times more resilient as an example. So what can we do? First, incentivizing sectoral data collection can improve risk assessments. Information gaps are pervasive, especially in sectors with large potential for sustainability. If we take renewable energy as an excellent example, where we have the cost of capital can be 7 times higher than in other parts of the world, although the African continent has 60% of the world's renewable resources potential, but has only 1% of the globally available capacity. With regards to international support, academic institutions, businesses can really contribute by offering detailed sectorial value chains data across such strategic sectors. For example, in the automotive industry, the African Automotive Data Networks identifies through detailed data on the continent's automotive industries, spare parts, vehicle sales, motorization rates, assembly plants. What are the tools, the inputs available, how to use them, and in which markets they are available, and making them available to investors to inform them in order to reduce the cost associated with the accessing data, and that can hinder investment and delay investment decisions. Other examples are an African market observatory monitoring prices and market dynamics in agri-food supply chain, for example. And we have many other examples, as you can see in telecommunications, where we have very rapid investment that actually boosted by intra-African investors in particular, who have benefited from this wave globally and are really unfolding on an unprecedented scale on the continent. So these are really important sectorial interventions that can take place. Finally, enhancing statistical capacity can also improve sustainability assessments. Our survey suggests that measurement standards and partners like capacity represent major barriers to the systematic collection and assessment of sustainability data. But a lot of local practices are not on the radar of policy makers because we don't know about them. And this is where communicators are really important. In Central Africa, for example, Congo Basin forests represent the largest carbon sink in the world, valued at about $55 billion per year. And more can be done to monetize these resources, generate revenues for the local communities, and preserve the ecosystems in that region in particular. As an example, Gabon became the first African country to receive funds at about $17 million from the Central African Forest Initiative for its efforts in reducing deforestation. But a lot more can be done. 17 million is good, but it's clearly not enough. And finally, what can public entities do? We have the presence of publicly available statistics, according to our business survey, is really important. So there is a big role for public actors to publicize data, make it publicly available, free of charge, ensure transparency in order to reduce the transaction costs for investors in accessing data. And in that regard, I can mention that the African Union, the OECD Development Center are working on together on an African investment observatory to tackle precisely that problem. To conclude, the main risk, the main problem is the perception of the continent by investors. This perception can be biased by the lack of information, and having access to quality data is therefore crucial to tackle that problem of misperception. And misperception has a lot of effects and impact. One particular impact is the high cost of capital on the continent, which is much higher than in other regions, precisely because of the misperception of risks. So working with local actors is absolutely important. The investment is more resilient, they know the markets better, but communicating about it is absolutely vital to change that perception and better understand the magnitude of opportunities that are on the continent and crucial not only for Africa, but for the world entirely. Thank you very much.
That was succinct, Arthur. So much information in such a short period of time. This report that has been put together is absolutely amazing, and I want to join you in thanking your partners at African Union for coming together to put this together. I think that it is ever so necessary to have good data coming out of this space so people can make informed decisions. There's credibility behind it, there's a lot of thought process behind it, and that is very evident in the report that has been shared. I'm going to allow Natasha jump right into her conversation she has a bit of a time frame issue. So I'm going to let her start her conversation. Arthur, we're going to come back with tons of questions. I'm certain without a doubt that the audience has questions. I want to encourage everyone to put your questions down in the message board. I will be reading them, collating them, and asking them when we are having the collective discussion. So please be encouraged to make your points. And we also want to hear, it doesn't necessarily have to be a question. You might have a fact or some information that buttresses something that one of the speakers have mentioned, and some evidence to sort of give body to what has been spoken about. We would also love to hear. We have a group of communicators here. We want to communicate effectively today. So Natasha, you have the stage now. We're looking forward to your presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Please let me know you could hear me.
I can hear you clearly and I can see.
Fantastic. Hello, everyone. Greetings from beautiful Cape Town. I'm normally based in Nairobi, but in Cape Town from work. I would say that Cape Town is the second most beautiful city after Nairobi. Before I get into our report, I'd just like to speak briefly about Africa No Filter and who we are, for those who don't know about Africa No Filter. Africa No Filter is a not-for-profit donor collaborative that exists because many stories about Africa still lazily revolve around the single story of poor leadership, poverty, corruption, disease, and conflict. These stories, while sometimes true, fail to portray the other more progressive side of Africa. And as a result, they collectively perpetuate narratives that Africa is broken, dependent, and lacks agency. The result? Harmful stereotypes that continue to paint a rigidly negative picture of the continent despite the massive strides we are making. Africa No Filter's mission is to shift these stereotypes because they impact the way the world sees Africa and how Africa sees itself. And most importantly, they impact the way the world invests in Africa and how Africa invests in the continent, Africans themselves. Because we know that narratives evolve through stories told persistently over time. We believe that the only way to shift a narrative is to change the underlying stories that feed them. So what do? We support African storytellers and the storytelling ecosystem through grants, research, community building, and advocacy that will aim with the aim of changing how the world sees Africa and Africa sees itself. And one of the ways we did this is to question the impact of news and the impact news and information around business had on Africa and African investments. And Africa No Filter believes that there has never been a better moment to change the investment narrative on Africa. And in order to do that, we needed data. We have not been able to find any detailed data analysis that unpacks African and international narratives, stories, and frames about business in Africa. So we decided to do one ourselves. Our report fills this gap, providing a comprehensive qualitative analysis of frames and stories about business in Africa yet to be undertaken. We show the keywords, frames, and stories and narratives associated with business in Africa are dangerously distorted. There's an overemphasis on the role of governments, foreign powers, which I'll get into later on in my presentation. And what makes this report unique is that this is the first time we've investigated news and content about business in Africa and the impact of perceptions about business as an investment, about Africa as a business and investment destination. It also identifies information and news gaps that offer alternative framing for business in Africa. Our report analyzed over 750 million stories published between 2017 and 2021 on more than 6,000 African news sites and 183,000 sites outside the continent. Insights were gained using 8 research approaches, including analyzing trends on Twitter, academic research, and literature reviews, as well as 22 global business indices. And I'd like to delve into some interesting, the significant frames that we found and the impact this may have on business in Africa. And we found 7 significant frames to stories about business in Africa. The first one, which doesn't come as a surprise, is that there's more negative coverage about doing business in Africa than there is positive. In fact, international media are more likely to negatively frame issues that impact on business in Africa, while African media are twice as likely to reference corruption in their coverage of business in Africa compared to international media. The second thing was a foreign power scramble for Africa. This was the most dominant frame that we found. When it comes to talking about business in Africa, the only context we find that 70% of international coverage about business in Africa is dominated by references to foreign powers like China, the USA, Russia, France, and the UK. Again, Africa is only 2 countries, and sometimes when the media is feeling generous, 3. Business in Africa coverage focuses on South Africa and Nigeria, and sometimes Kenya when it's feeling generous. While business stars like Mauritius, Botswana, and Seychelles and Namibia get little to no coverage and research attention in the news. Another frame that we found is the silencing of creativity and amplification of technology, which is a shame because despite Nollywood being the second largest film industry and the growing influence of musical influences like Afrobeats and Amapiano, we find that it is less than 1% of all articles across African and global media. The impact of creativity on the continent is rarely looked through a business and investment lens. Number 5, we found that youth and women are underrepresented in news and information, which is strange because Africa claims the top 3 spots in the Mastercard Index for the highest concentration of women business owners in the world. It also has the youngest population. However, women and youth are underrepresented when it comes to business news. In fact, online coverage of women and young people has declined since 2017, falling from 12.5% of articles referencing young people in 2017 to 8.1% in 2021. Number 6, we found that government policy and regulations dominate the conversations and business, and this could have its reasons. Around 55% of business news in 2021 was framed through government action and policies. Additionally, African media focused more on themes related to government than on those related to entrepreneurship and investment. Yet African countries make up 6 of the top 10 countries whose populations are more likely to search for the topic of entrepreneurship in 2021. Lastly, and slightly more tragically, is the missing free trade and investment conversation. The AFCFTA agreement only makes up 1%, in fact, less than 1% of news and academic research. Yet the agreement is expected to lift 30 million Africans out of extreme poverty and to boost the incomes of nearly 64 million others. It is projected to boost Africa's income by 450 billion by 2035 and increase Africa exports by 560 billion, through mostly manufacturing. While these are the expectations that this agreement has, the news around AFCFTA rarely exists in media and information. And this again forms a tragic impact on how we think about business and investment in the continent. And at Africa No Filter, we think that it is important to create a more balanced narrative about business in Africa. If you're a journalist, storyteller, academic think tank, business school consultant, it is important to ask yourself a few questions. What frames are you including? Are you just focusing on the negative? Have you balanced any negative frames about business issues with legitimate positive frames? Is this a nuanced approach or is it skewed towards a particular perception? Is there already conscious bias when we're reporting around Africa and African issues? Are we exploring a wide range of sectors? Are we covering technology, finance, agriculture, which is important on the continent? Or are we focusing only on the things that are not going right? Are we taking an Africa-centric approach? When we think about Africa, we only think about Africa in relation to how important or relevant it is to the USA, China, and Russia. How about exploring how important Africa is for Africans themselves? What investing in Africa means for Africans themselves? How about shifting that narrative and focusing on an Africa-centric approach? When we think about these things, these are some of the questions that we challenge media organizations to focus on or to explore, and also broaden the range of African countries covered. Is it just South Africa, Nigeria, and Kenya that is used as an African country in examples? Are we paying attention to the smaller yet mighty countries such as Mauritius, Botswana, and Namibia? Are we centering women and young people's perspectives when it comes to exploring the business challenges and investment opportunities on the continent? And are we shifting emphasis from the state towards Africans themselves, the businesses that exist, and the attention that we give to the frequently remarkable stories of African entrepreneurs who are succeeding against the odds? And this is not to turn a blind eye to sometimes the major roadblocks and challenges that face entrepreneurs on the continent. But if we focus more on the spaces that are being created and the work that has already been done, perhaps we can begin to have different conversations. And lastly, what's the AFCFTA got to do with it? And we say a whole lot. And I think it's a challenge to the AU, because in the AU, there's an AFCFTA secretariat, and we already have these conversations with them to ensure that adequate attention is given to disseminating information about the AFCFTA agreement and the opportunities available, but most importantly, to begin educating Africans across the continent about the need for this agreement and how it may transform the lives of Africans in general. And these are some of the things we want organizations and the media to take into consideration as they begin thinking through the narratives that exist and the harmful stereotypes that have been created over time, because stories and the perceptions they create are powerful. Stories about business in Africa and how they are framed directly impact individuals' motivation and desire to set up new businesses and to trade with, invest, or finance businesses on the continent. I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much.
Wow, Natasha, thank you very much. That was a lot of information to take in. I really, really want to employ everyone to go through the report. It's been posted on the chat group. So Isabella has been kind enough to share the links with us. Please, at your own time, go through it. Thank you so much. Ingrid, I think, is your hand up? Or was that a wave? Or was that someone else? Sorry. Okay. Sorry about that. So we'll leave the questions. Okay. We'll leave the questions for when we converge as a group to discuss and take some of the questions from the audience as well. Natasha, so much information. Thank you so much for sharing that. Even I am blown away at how much we don't know as a communicator within the African space, and just looking at how much knowledge I had gleaned in this short time. So thank you so much for that. I'm going to let Nadia come up next, Kulibali, and she's going to take us through her presentation and her conversation around the excitement and how good it is to still bring that money to Africa. We need it. So I'm going to let her, because when she was talking about it earlier, I tapped into the excitement. I believe you, Nadia. I want the whole house to believe you as well. So please jump right in and give us a reason to believe, okay?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. So thank you for having me today. So I'm Nadia Kwasi, Head of Research at AFCA. So AFCA is the African Private Capital Association. For those who don't know AFCA, so AFCA is committed to enabling private capital investment in Africa. So we play a significant role as an effective change agent for the industry by educating, equipping, and connecting investors and key stakeholders with independent industry research, advocacy, best practice, professional development program, but also networking opportunities. So what to say about Africa as an investment destination? So undoubtedly, Africa can be described as an attractive investment destination, offering investors a multitude of opportunities to achieve impact, diversification, but also return. So the continent, it's a huge investment potential, is supported by several macroeconomic fundamentals and also improvement in the regulatory environment. So firstly, I would say that Africa has historically been amongst the fastest growing region in the world, and this trend still continue. Looking ahead, the latest data from the World Bank project a 3.6% growth for Africa in 2023, which remain higher than prediction for example, Latin America and the Caribbean at 1.3%, and also the Europe and Central Asia at 0.1%. Secondly, Africa has a rapidly expanding population and rising middle class, and the continent is home to to this fastest growing middle class, with an estimated of 1.1 billion people expected to join the middle class by 2030. And this growing middle class is driving demand for consumer goods and services, creating new investment opportunities for investors who can tap into this growing market. Thirdly, I would say that Africa has been witnessing an impressive growth in entrepreneurship and innovation. So Africa's vibrant startup ecosystem, tech hubs and incubators not only foster technological innovation, but also present several, investment opportunities. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. We just had a bit of interference, but it cleared out right away. Go ahead.
Perfect. So I was saying that Africa also presents several investment opportunities within the venture capital space across a variety of sectors, such as fintech, e-commerce, health tech, and clean tech. Finally, many countries, African countries, are making reforms in order to improve the investment climate, make it easier for foreign investors to do business. And these reforms include reducing taxes, for example, streamlining regulation, improving infrastructure, and even investment protection from foreign investors. Improvement also to the business environment are also made easier to start and operate as a business in Africa. So as being the African Private Capital Association, we are seeing some same pattern or kind of attitude amongst the investors. And if I have to categorize them, I would say that first, we see a kind of optimism regarding the investment opportunities and the untapped potential that the continent offers. We've seen more and more confidence in the long-term attractiveness of the continent, and a high level, what is needed, I would say, is also a high level of adaptability to local market condition and regulatory framework, along with a strong focus on impact and sustainable investing in Africa, which has been an integral part of investing in Africa due to the significant role of the GFIs in Africa. And finally, the focus of investors on the role of innovation and technology constitute a pivot trend that emerged over the last decade. And we are about also to release our annual private capital industry survey, which presents insight on investor sentiment and plan, and all these trends have been confirmed by the surveyed respondents. So the survey revealed that 85% of institutional investors, participants plan to increase their allocation to African private capital, driven to do so primarily, again, by the impact, by diversification, and also by their investment mandate. What was quite also surprising is that 52% of these respondents expecting it to be more attractive than other emerging markets in the next 5 years, which is really promising. So what needs to change, and there is any space for a better communication? I would say yes, definitely. Because in addition to these vast opportunities that the continent offers, it's important not to neglect the challenges that exist. And we should clearly discuss these challenges openly, since this is the only way to first identify them, address them, and finally enable more investment on the continent. That said, some of the challenges we hear from investors and that are associated with investing in Africa have been macroeconomic risk, like currency volatility, political uncertainty, and also the heterogeneity and complexity of a regulatory environment in some cases. However, I would say that some of these challenges are built around perceptions that are part of the past and are improving now nowadays, and don't reflect, I would say, generally the current reality. So in this case, communication can play and should play a crucial role in dispelling false perception. And yes, lastly, I would say using and sharing data, case studies, insight from industry practitioner, build the narrative, the narrative among investors, but also broadly is decisive. And at AFCA, one of our responsibilities is to present investors with this realistic picture of investing in Africa. Thank you, Tommy.
Thank you so much, Nadia. I told you that she was going to come at us with exciting facts. You know, from our three speakers, it's so clear to me that what we are identifying as a problem is no longer data. And I think it's very, very important to give a round of applause and to acknowledge the work that has happened over the last few years in ensuring the collation and the preparation of accurate data by independent bodies, by governmental bodies, by private organizations, to ensure that there's right information that is being used to make decisions around Africa. So kudos to each and every one of you, because so much work has gone into ensuring that we are not just speaking from a passion point of view, but from a factual point of view. It's less sentiment and more factual. And I think that that is something to commend. I hear data, data, data across board. Everyone's talking about no decision wants to be made if you can put some facts behind it. And that is so important. But remember that the reason why we're here is trying to figure out how best to communicate, how communicators can help in ensuring that this narrative doesn't stay on paper, that it doesn't stay as something that has, you know, the research guys have done, or that African No Filter has put energy and effort into, but it's something that people are actually able to hear about and to believe in. That's the only way the perception gets changed. So thank you to our three speakers today. And I want to open the floor up for questions. I see that while we were doing our welcome and all that, Felix had asked people why this topic is of interest to them. So I'm going to allow some of the people that have put some points in to ask some questions so that I don't have to put people on the spot. But believe you me, as a dedicated communicator, I am more than happy to call people to have discussions today. So by show of hands, if you raise your hand, then one of the co-hosts is able to call you and able to engage. So if we have any hands up, we can engage them. Do we have hands up? Any comments, questions, concerns for Natasha, for Nadia, and of course for the gentleman who went first, Arthur? We should have done that around. We should have made the gentleman go last. No, just joking. Okay, so while we're waiting for people to warm up to asking questions, I do want to make a few notes, especially, and I'm going to start from Nadia because you were the last person that spoke. You spoke to the dynamism of entrepreneurship within Africa and how even that in itself is something that is noteworthy. It's made the growth of business much more rapid, which means that any investment is viable. And we have seen that. We've seen that over the years. We've seen it, especially in the fintech space. We've seen so many success stories, so many investment success stories over the last few years. A lot of people have taken back seats to going to work every day just from making the right choices and investments in African communities. So I just wanted to ask you, from your own point of view at AVCA, what do you think that the role of identifying the uniqueness and dynamism of businesses and entrepreneurs, especially entrepreneurs in Africa, how do you think that that is going to change the narrative, the greater narrative? Because it's almost like we are creating our own Steve Jobs here. We are creating our own, we're creating those big names, in our space. So how do you think that this is going to help us in changing this perception in the long term? You're muted, Nadia.
Sorry, can you please quickly repeat your last part of the sentence?
So I said that you highlighted that there's such dynamism, especially when it comes to entrepreneurs within the African space. And you've seen that it's fast growing. It's something that is very attractive. How are we going to use this? Like, what sort of narratives, the case studies, the stories that we need to tell, examples, if you have any off the top of your head, that helps tie in the story?
Yeah, so definitely, I think reason we should focus on the reason of this strong performance, right? If I focus on the venture capital in Africa, for example, yes, we should focus on the reason of this strong performance, and which are various, right? So for example, Africa venture capital in 2022 attracted more than approximately 7 billion, right? Even if it's just representing 1.2% of the total value of the global venture funding in 2022, this is way higher than what we've observed in the past. And one reason for the fact that Africa was and still is one of the fastest growing venture capital for market globally is because of its relative infancy and youth. So Africa shares, as I said, is quite small, but the continent has more ground, I would say, to cover than other emerging and developed markets such as Europe and Asia. So high investor, I would say, confidence and interest on the continent, therefore has a greater impact that it would be in other regions, as the baseline and starting point is different, I mean, relatively lower. And another reason for the fact, again, that Africa is considered as being an attractive in the venture capital landscape is the fact that it's driven by deals at the seed stage. By seed stage, we mean the early stage of the company. And seed stage were also the largest, right, growing market segment in 2022, what we saw in our latest report. And notably, these ones are predominantly led by African investors investing at a smaller ticket size. So because of this, deal at this stage had a higher degree of insulation from global macroeconomic, for example, headwinds, and thus contributed to the acceleration of deal activity on the continent. So it still offers opportunity and a diversification for investors.
Thank you so much, Nadia. Thank you so much. We do have a question. So we have two questions. I'm going to take them really quickly so that we can still break into our small group and come back, if that's okay, Felix, by nod of, okay. All right, thank you so much. Okay, so we have one down. Tariq Ben Yusuf said, do we think that we need the paradigm shift from communications to strategic communications approach with an objective of persuading and influencing a specific ask? I'm going to let Natasha take that question. Natasha, I don't know if you've seen that question. And the reason why I would like Natasha to take that question is he's asking if we need a paradigm shift from, I guess, basic communication to a more strategic communication. I'm giving you this question because you have talked quite painstakingly and passionately about what dominates the news when it comes to, what dominates communication when it comes to Africa. You've talked about the perception that is constantly reinforced by a narrative that is so perpetuated, we think that it's second nature. So how do we move that to a strategic communication approach with where the main objective is persuading and influencing a specific ask? If you could give us a sort of response in 30 seconds, we'd really appreciate that.
Absolutely. I'll try and 30 seconds is 30 seconds are already done. I think the first thing to do is to understand the existing narratives and why they exist. Because before we begin strategically communicating and engaging, we need to know why these narratives are there and why they've been perpetuated for so long. The second thing is to begin mapping our audience and the stories and conversations they need to receive. A 25 to 30-year-old's form of communication is very different. In fact, we just recently got a report that 80% of young Africans under the age of 25 get their news from TikTok. So if we want to, again, to influence and engage young Africans, we must be cognizant of where they are present, where they're consuming their information. And it's the same with decision makers and policy makers. And I don't think just on the continent, globally, statistically, it takes less than a minute for someone to lose focus when it comes to reading on investment and reports. So how can we ensure that in that 45 seconds, we've caught the necessary attention of those people that need to make decisions about investing on the continent? And the conversations need to start shifting and focusing more on the opportunities that have existed, the barriers that have already been put down, and most importantly, the strides that are being made. I think another flip in reframing needs to also focus on the challenges that need to be overcome to ensure and create a climate of investment and opportunity on the continent. So I think there is a long-term approach into communicating strategically for the continent and in ensuring that we are achieving the goals that we need to achieve.
Thank you so much, Natasha. If I did have two more hands up, if you don't mind typing out your question, I'd really, really appreciate it. That I'm going to be honest, the time difference has thrown me off in my timekeeping. So I've been looking at my clock, thinking that we are ahead of time, and I've just realized that we actually fast spent for time. So please, if I can just encourage you to put the question down, I would really like us to jump into the small group networking session, even if we only do it for 5 minutes. I'd really appreciate it. Let's get to know each other. It's going to be thrown randomly. I think Felix or Isabel is going to coordinate that. If we can do that really, really quickly, I completely appreciate it. I do apologize for having to cut our conversation on. We can put the questions down, we can come back to it, but let's just try to keep to our schedule, please. Thank you so much, Felix. You can take it from here.
Thank you, Domi. Yes, so we are, this event is being organized by two networks, the Africa Communications Week Network and the DevCom Network. And together, I think I speak for all of us organizers, we're convinced that part of the solution to improving our communications, our narratives, is partnership. And because partnerships, they can help us reach new audiences. They can help us learn new skills in communications, but more importantly, they can help us tell a much more accurate and balanced and powerful story about the work that all of us are trying to promote on sustainable development. So we thought, it's virtual, but let's spend a few minutes getting to know a few other people sharing this common goal of trying to use communications in order to promote sustainable development in Africa. And well, okay, let's try and break into groups of 5. And I think we'll spend about 5 or 6 minutes. So we won't have a lot of time, but you don't have a big task to do. All we expect you to do in 5 minutes in your groups is to come up with 1 or 2 specific suggestions on what we as communicators can do better to boost investment into Africa. And if we could come back as reassemble, please drop those suggestions into the chat. But mainly just please meet new friends, meet new potential partners that you can follow up with at another point after this event. Isabella, please take us into our virtual small groups. Welcome back, everybody. And I see that most of us have made it back out of these small groups and into the plenary session. It is 3:10 in the afternoon here, Paris time, so we don't have all that much time left. So I think what would be great is if Tomi could take us forward with the next session. And meanwhile, I would ask all of you who just had interesting conversations like I did in the small groups to put some of your solutions and ideas into the chat window. And I will do so right away and hope we can gather lots of great ideas. Tomi, over to you.
All right, Felix, thank you so much. Yes, it was getting exciting, but we are fast spent for time, so we're going to jump right in. Our next discussion is, again, we looked at some problems before, as Harry Bernard had mentioned, and now we're looking at some solutions. So we're having a conversation now around changing perception. And there's nothing we communicators love more than to dissect perception management and change and all that. And today with me, I have Yor Afriyi. He's the Deputy CEO of Ghana Investment Promotion Center. Welcome, Yor. I'm not seeing you on my screen yet, but I'm sure you're going to come up real soon. Okay, definitely. Hi. I have Mark Gray. Thank you so much for making time for us today, Yor. I know you're in the middle of 1,000,002 things, so we sincerely appreciate your presence today. We also have Mark Gray. I'm just going to do quick introductions and then come right to you. He's the head of political strategy and communications for European Union Commission, international partnerships specifically. Thank you so much for being with us today, here with us today, Mark. We did have a bit of a chat during our earlier conversation, so I'm looking forward to you sharing your wisdom. And last but not least, we have Serene Mbaye, is the CEO of West Africa and Country Head Ghana for DHL Global Forwarding. The 3 speakers today will be giving us insights on how changing perception becomes a necessity for communicators across board. I'm going to let you jump right in. I know that you are very time bound, so please go ahead and drive us into this conversation. The floor is yours, Yor.
Sure, and good afternoon, everybody. There was a bit of a technical glitch, so apologies for joining slightly late. But I will delve straight into the overarching theme, which is around the opportunities that an investment promotion agency like GIPC views in terms of how we pivot the Africa discussion of one which is risk laden, which is effectively negative, and turning it into a positive one. And as GIPC, we of course take into consideration the number of perceptions, the negative perceptions that surround the continent, and for that matter, Ghana, when it comes to a number of factors, including the economic conditions, of course, macroeconomic volatility, uncertainty, when it comes to market sentiment, when it comes to even returns, political stability and issues around democracy and policy certainty, infrastructure development, regulatory frameworks, among other plethora of issues, compound the perception of our continent, and for that matter, Ghana. Now, for us at GIPC, we simply want to combat the narrative by essentially providing the opportunities that are abound in our country, and state the pointers that we believe gives Ghana a competitive edge when it comes to our ability to country market, first of all, Ghana and the opportunities within the country. So, for example, we typically focus on the vast opportunities, growth opportunities within our priority sectors. The country is moving into, if you like, a manufacturing space. The president has set the policy right from the top, which is one of moving the country away from, a typical resource economy where we extract and then export the. Sorry, there's a bit of feedback from one of the.
Can I just remind everyone for us to stay muted so that we don't intervene with our speakers? Thank you so much. Sorry, you have the floor again.
Yeah, so I was saying that so the country now is on a path towards industrialization, led by value addition within agro-processing and effectively manufacturing. It cannot be that a country like Ghana is disproportionately tilted towards the services sector. Now, the services sector, you have to ask yourself, has obviously value chain implications for manufacturing and industry. But for a very long time, given the lopsided nature of our economy, we have had a number of services, companies, and opportunities sprung up. So we want to reverse that trend. And so for us, the growth potential of the country currently is one of manufacturing, adding value to the natural resources that we have, adding value to our processing, and using technology to augment all of that. So we're able to leapfrog into a new set of opportunities that will expand the middle class of the country, and also increase the take-up of the opportunities within the value chain. We also see the potential for markets and resource opportunities. Of course, just as we want to move away from the extraction of raw materials to export, we also recognize that given where we sit with macroeconomic instability and difficulty, the only growth polls for us currently in Ghana, as has been backed by the data, is coming predominantly from the extractives industry. But we also want to look at extractives, perhaps with a different lens than we have in the past, which is one of sustainability, innovation, and creativity, but also one that has a cascading impact on local businesses. And I'll give you an example. Ghana has been mining gold for over the last 150 years. And really, we haven't been able to galvanize the commanding heights of the local mining value chain. And we believe that must change. And by changing that, we have doubled down on our localization policy, which has allowed local entrepreneurs to be able to play within this market. But at the same time, we have also put in place sustainable development metrics so that the upstream end of that value chain is able to attract the kind of sustainable financing which will transform the industry, whilst also having some local dividends by attracting the right kind of partnerships and linkages with Ghanaian businesses. So we don't see it as a quid pro quo. We are not antagonistic to foreign capital. We welcome foreign capital, but we also recognize that local commerce and local businesses must participate within that value chain. Furthermore, as an organization which is responsible for mobilizing inward investment, we see the AFCFTA as a game changer of sorts. Of course, it is a slow burner. It will take some time to bed into the various economies that are signatories to the agreement. But just as there are many gateways in Europe for investment, we see Africa as also having many gateways for the AFCFTA. So when it comes to West Africa, Ghana is really putting itself forward as the gateway for foreign direct investment, firstly to bed into our economy and the priority sectors, and then springboard into the rest of the 1.4 billion population market with a combined and growing GDP of approximately 3 trillion. And so for us, some of these pointers are important in terms of changing the narrative towards opportunity rather than risk, because of course the market sentiment is there. There is a youthful population that is ready to take up the opportunities within the labor market. And of course, the returns are great. If you look at, for example, Ghana's real estate sector, the returns are, I mean, astronomical. If you look at the technology sector, financial technology, for example, it is a booming market. If you look at agriculture and agro-processing, we are doing much more locally than has been in the past. So I think effectively for us, the move from risk to opportunity has its anchors really within the growth potential of what we offer as a country, and how government also takes on the onerous responsibility to reform. Because I think in the past, we all have to be frank about where we are coming from. In the past, the reforms conversation was really being dictated by multilateral partners and other bilateral partners. But here we are today, that many African countries, including Ghana, are taking the reforms agenda seriously. I speak for my institution when I say that we are painstakingly trying to grapple with antiquated rules and regulations within our statute, which would effectively remove the bottlenecks and the barriers to, first of all, foreign capital, whilst also providing local safeguards for businesses within our country. And so overall, working with partners such as the OECD, other multilaterals, working with important publications such as Forbes, such as Bloomberg, CNN, and our ability to create the narrative, the Ghanaian narrative, the African narrative, and put it on the TV screens, which has reach across the entire globe, is systematically changing the perceptions of the continent as one of a dark continent, a security risk continent, a political risk continent, to one of opportunity, emerging market, investment friendliness, regional integration, and sustainable development. And I think I would leave it there for now. And if there are any questions or any emphasis, I can delve into the matters further.
Thank you so much, Yor. That was really, really insightful. Thank you. You've given us a lot to chew on and to think about. We are going to go straight to Mark Gray, who's going to take us on his own perception of what needs to be changed. And we'll leave the questions to the end of the three discussants first, if you don't mind. So Mark, you have the floor. before we go into our open discussions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the kind invitation to all concerned. And let me begin by saying this is such a wonderful opportunity to learn, because my starting point is a very simple one. We've heard about data, and I'm the first to say that's the starting point. And I think the presentations we've had, really some insightful information there. But secondly, we also hear about narrative, and I think that, again, I want to come at it from our perspective, and a first statement that we very much see the need to totally change the narrative and the way we approach communication. Just to give you a very simple couple of facts, as some have said, we are the largest provider of development assistance globally as the European Union and member states, so 92.8 billion in 2022. The reality is that the perception on the African continent does not reflect that investment. Now, that for us is a clear wake-up call that the way we have approached communication in the past, focused on every single project and program, very much looking at it from a what are we doing as the European Union in these countries, does not work. So for us, there is immediately a desire to learn the lesson of that data and ask ourselves, how should we change the way we communicate? But of course, it's much more than just a communication. It's a whole political and policy and communication approach to the way we work with our partners. And the word partners for us is crucial. It is no longer a donor, recipient, aid, narrative, and conversation. It is no longer a conversation about our partners extracting raw materials and exporting them outside. It is actually a shift to a discussion around how does Africa produce its own vaccines? How does Africa produce its own food? How does Africa produce its own raw materials within and trading within Africa? So how do we build actually the strategic autonomy of Africa? So that kind of shift is fundamental for us as a starting point. Of course, nobody is naive here. There is an increasing international competition. And there is a massive investment gap, as I think has been shown by the presentations earlier. So that's why for us, we have put together an initiative called Global Gateway that really does focus on energy, transport, education, health, digital, but also again in a new approach. Overseas development assistance alone is never going to be enough. It is necessary, but it is not sufficient to address this gap. So our starting point is, how can we bring everybody together from what we call a Team Europe approach? So the governments, yes. The European institutions, yes. But also the banks. We've heard somebody here from the European Investment Bank. But above all, the private sector. And that for us is, I think, a recognition of doing things a different way. But then also, dare I say, addressing the traditional complaint we hear from African leaders. The European Union is very good at talking. It is very good at producing conclusions. But are we able to walk the talk? Are we able to deliver quickly and on the key issues that matter to our partners? And that's, again, the shift that we're trying to look at. And then that means being very concrete. So it means, to give you some concrete example, I mean, I am tempted with your being the speaker from talking from Ghana. I'm very conscious that when we do our own perception surveys in Ghana, the European Union does not exist as a key player. I think 14% in our perception surveys recognize the positive role of the European Union. So, we have a long way to go. And the way to do that for us is to be very concrete on, okay, green hydrogen, Namibia, green hydrogen in other key partner countries. Who do we work with? Okay, the ports of Rotterdam and Antwerp. We work with Hyphen. There is a major announcement today in Namibia on an agreement together with the government. So working very concretely on what can we do in that specific area to put together a key project, but working with the private sector as well. Vaccines manufacturing. We are working, of course, with BioNTech. We are working with Universals from Belgium, whether that be in Senegal, whether that be in Ghana, whether that be in Rwanda, whether that be in South Africa. So how concretely can we put together infrastructure which isn't just about money, it's actually about creating the whole ecosystem. So here in the case of BioNTech, you have the investment, but it's about putting in place the research, the education, the jobs, the skills, that whole ecosystem around a project to bring that to fruition. So again, that is the sort of approach we're now taking as a Team Europe approach, bringing all those key players together, then looking at how we communicate around that. The challenge for us, I'll be very open, is that in the past we've not worked extensively with the private sector, and we are really now looking at how we can increase that cooperation, working with partners across the globe, not just in Africa, to bring together these projects. So for us, the narrative is, and I liked the previous speakers' comments on opportunity, but for us, I think it's the narrative of partners for change, partners together to make the change that we want to see. So that's the new approach we're trying to take. We're doing huge amounts of work on perception surveys, data, target audience segmentation. I think we've a long way to go in looking at how through business fora or individual workshops on these projects, we can bring the private sector with us. And it's about, for us, reaching those new audiences. In the past, we've been very good at talking within the bubble, whether that be in the capital of our partner countries, or whether that be with the usual stakeholders. And I think one of the key challenges we face, and one we are determined to address, is how do we reach these new audiences, whether that be the private sector, but also the general public, the 18 to 35 audience, of course, youth being central to that. So I'm going to just leave it there, but again, very happy to talk in more concrete terms about individual projects or countries, and look forward to the debate. Many thanks.
Thank you so much, Mark. That was insightful. I really, really like the angle that you started with, and I think it ties a lot with what Yo was speaking about. We will discuss this right after Serene presents. So I'm waiting. Okay, I see him now. Okay, so Serene Mbaye is going to go up next, and then we'll have the discussion right after that. Thank you.
Thank you, Tomilaya, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to provide the point of view of the private sector. We are on the ground, we are a global company, but we are almost everywhere in Africa, and we're still growing our footprint. talking about the narratives, I would just want to remind everybody that, Africa pre-COVID-19, top 5 economies are projected to grow by 5.5% on average this year and onward, actually. And what this means is Africa will reclaim the 60% presence in the top 10 fastest growing economies globally. And I'm talking about Rwanda, Cote d'Ivoire, Benin, Ethiopia, Tanzania, but also Egypt, which is still in the top 10 fastest growing economy. Africa is also one of the youngest workforce, and these are opportunities we are looking for to invest in this continent. Unfortunately, this is not the type of stories we hear, right? We definitely need information on legal framework as a business because we are extremely compliant. We have a set of values. We need to know all these information related to business environment, how friendly they are, what are the tax systems, etc. The implementations or behaviors in the ground, but also, all the benchmark, because nobody talks about the benchmark we have in Africa. People just talk about restrictions and protectionism, which is reality, but they don't talk about also, the high return of investment, a global network, but we don't shy off when we see the type of profit we're generating as opposed to what is generated in more major markets. So this is still a continent with a lot of opportunities and untapped opportunities, niche market, because we need a lot to connect still Africa to the world and create a set of values for many players, I would say. So our priority focus is still compliance and ethical business practices, clear business rules, political stability, and in that concern also, people don't talk a lot about that. They will focus on one of the 2 or 3 countries where we have military corps extra, but they don't talk about all these countries like Ghana, where we have, political stability and peaceful transfer of power since decades. I think this is where we need information, right, to answer the question. So definitely everything is over-exaggerated when it comes to Africa. I was in Nigeria, one of my countries, last week, and basically, everybody I talked about was quite nervous for me to visit Nigeria, and it was extremely fine for me. I did not see any threat. In the US, just to illustrate, every day 321 people are killed, right? Statistics, official statistics. But nobody talks about that. People only remember the 21 people that are killed in Nigeria this year. And this illustrates also the narratives I heard about. So we have a need for a more balanced information. We need more success stories from our countries, right? We need, all these good things that are happening in Africa because there are so many entrepreneurs, SMEs, run by women and young people, which need market, and they just need to be connected. So they need investment, they need partners extra, but we don't need fear. And we don't need also to focus on all those negative events that do not actually promote Africa. Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't realize I was muted. I think I see that Serene, because we were chatting earlier, I see that Serene has made his input quite succinct because he wants us to sort of have discussions around it. So I'd like us to start those discussions right away. If you're still there, as well as Mark and Serene, if there are questions from the audience, now would be a good time for us to tackle some of them. I'm just going to do a quick recap as we wait for questions. Sorry, did someone unmute? Hello? Okay, not sure. Okay, just probably feedback. I really like that you started the conversation off talking about how, again, emphasizing what had been spoken about with the first panel, data, the use of data to change facts, to change, and facts to change perception, very insightful. He gave a lot of personal examples with the company that he's working with, and that was also very interesting. But I do like the angle that Mark came in with, you know. So after all this research has been done, when we have all this amazing data on ground, what do we do with it? How ready and equipped are we to hit the ground running and to actually make sense of some of these amazing numbers that we hear about? How willing are the policies that are in place to, you know, to sort of substantiate some of these things? And I think that there's a lot of conversation to go around that, you know. Personally, as someone who delves into a lot of research and always has because of my background, I do find that we do sit in research phase and celebrate the amount of data that we're able to spew out. And sometimes it doesn't directly translate into the actual solution providing. And I think that I really like that angle. And Serene sort of brought it home quite unknowingly. She's given examples of the realities on ground with the company that he works for. So I think it's been an amazing discussion for me. I've learned so many new things, and I would really like us to delve into some questions that anyone might have around changing perception, around finding solutions that are beyond things that are just merely written on paper. What are some of the things that we need to do? Another point that I will try to draw on as we sort of stylishly wait for any other partakers is the importance of partnership. I mean, we are all here on this call today through the power of partnership, and the need for partnership is where the perception starts to change. It's where we start to change the narrative. We don't see each other as threats. Instead, we look at how to build a stronger, more formidable ecosystem that involves even sometimes the most unlikely people. And I think that that is something to take on board. I liked the reference that Yor made to the partners obviously working hard, especially within the media space, to showcase a different narrative. If you were a part of the earlier session, you would have heard Natasha speak quite adamantly about how much work needs to be done in that regard. And I think that partnership becomes the solution to that problem that was raised. So yeah, do we have any more questions or concerns or just even comments? I see Harry's hand up. Please go right ahead, Henry Bernard.
Merci beaucoup, Tomilayo. I have one question. I have one question for our panelists, which is about whether the market for communication capacity in Africa is at a state of maturity where they can be active players, you know, to do a better job at communicating in and on Africa. So the market, African professionals of communications, we have a few around this table. Is that still, you know, a market limitation, or are we getting to the point where we could work more with them?
Thank you so much for that question. Should I let Yor go ahead with that? Or if all three speakers can give really short perspectives of the readiness, I guess, and capacity, ability for us to actually be in that space and be actual players that are formidable. I think maybe I should give each speaker, so I'll give Yor, Serene, and Mark an opportunity within 20 seconds to just give their perspective before we move on to the next question. Thank you.
Yes, I think that's a really good question. If you look at the recent history of PR and communications, you're seeing that the private sector is taking up much more of the onus on themselves to help change the narratives. I think governments have not done particularly well over the last 10 years in terms of how they curate their own narratives for global consumption. But as IPAs, as African IPAs, and we recently had a meeting in Accra, we recognize that there is an information deficit, and the charge is on agencies that are responsible for country marketing the opportunities that exist within their own markets. Because if we can't identify properly and put together a set of narratives that are plausible, that are indeed marketable for international consumption, then I think as IPAs, we simply have failed in our basic mandate. And so as GIPC, we spent a disproportionate amount of our budget on public relations and communications, as well as corporate affairs, because we believe that the two are essentially inextricably linked. You can't have a good public relations communication strategy or message without the right partnerships and linkages, which is why we are working with multilateral partners. We're working with the likes of GIZ and etc., OECD, CNN, and other global platforms, so that we amplify the message. But of course, the work is not done. There are a number of shortfalls in how we communicate our message effectively. And there's also a lot of constraints when it comes to budget. I think fiscally, we also have to be very honest about the conversation, that there is a limited pool of resources, and governments can only prioritize what is within their manifesto or what makes policy sense for them at any given time. And often the IPA is a cost center. The IPA is we are a drag on resources. And so partnerships for us becomes essential, so that we can propagate the message through missions, through webinars, through inbound delegations, and so on. But lastly, before I go, I think that our work has a bit of a way to go. In 2021, according to UNCTAD's World Investment Report, approximately $83 billion worth of foreign direct investment came into the continent. Ghana that year was a recipient of 2.6 billion, behind Nigeria in West Africa as the second largest recipient. But the 83 billion, as great as it sounds, only constituted 5% of global foreign direct investment. And within that, the desirable foreign direct investment, which is greenfield foreign direct investment, which we are courting, just as other African countries are courting, is on the low, is flatlining. And there is great demand for greenfield investment. It is incredibly competitive. And we are also losing out on project finance and M&A deals in the continent. So now the question, perhaps, I'll play devil's advocate here. Sorry, Madam Moderator, is how do we ensure? I mean, we talked about the sentiments, we talked about the market opportunity, but clearly the numbers are not reflective. How do we ensure that we are using smart communications, smart partnerships and linkages to increase the foreign direct investment figure? Otherwise, effectively, the pool of financing that we need to be able to transform our economies is essentially shut out from the continent. And we also understand the need for concessionary financing and the Eurobond markets and commercial markets and so on, which 21 African countries are currently playing within in terms of the Eurobond market, but are paying disproportionately higher than their peers with similar or worse fundamentals. So there are so many issues that are at stake. And I go back to my friend, Mr. Mbaye's point, who is my very good friend in Ghana, and he talked about the need for regulatory frameworks and legal frameworks and so on. But my contention and our contention as GIPC is that as a growing economy, as an economy on the forward march, having finite policies or having policies that fit within a certain box and have the predictability over a long period of time, it becomes very difficult for us. Because we are bound to break our own rules because of where we are within our development cycle. And so I will leave that as a thought for the rest of the conversation.
Thank you so much, Yo. You definitely, in fact, you answered the question and then you raised two more questions. So I think I'm going to, as opposed to labeling them as questions, I'm going to refer to them as fruitful thoughts, things to discuss as we deepen our networking skills. We've all met amazing people on this call. Even just with me, I've gotten distracted from my phone beeping for LinkedIn invites. So this is what this community is about. This is what we're trying to groom here. The conversations only start here. These are just platforms for us to begin to look at things, not to end things. So thank you so much for the contribution. We're fast spent for time. Emmanuel has his hand up. Emmanuel Santi has his hand up for questions. I think
Yes.
Serene wanted to contribute, but I will give you just if you give me a minute to take Emmanuel's question just to see if it's
just a couple
Go
of
ahead.
like very quick just one single observation.
Not a problem.
There is a player which is missing in many of these discussions, which is the real private sector, the real African private sector. If I am an investor in Europe, the person that I will listen the most will be my peer, right? An investment professional, someone that is doing his business in Africa. And there are great stories to be told about, say, investors, especially African investors, which have overcome all the difficulties that the investment climate is oftentimes confronting these investors with. So I think there is a whole agenda that we should really focus on, which is about helping investors, African homegrown success stories actually came out. And these people are very busy with their work. They are not communicators. And that's one of the things that, has an NGO which is incubating African social enterprises, but we are realizing more and from entrepreneurs, not necessarily of business planning and a number of other things, but really helping them communicate, even doing a successful pitch, storytelling. And there's a huge agenda where we can really want to have this serious ambassadors. The real ambassadors to Africa should be the people that every day wake up in the morning, run a business successfully, despite all the challenges that they're having. And so unless we are bringing this voice out, we're not going to be successful to attracting other peers that are still very much reluctant to investing in the continent. They have a lot of fears, misconceptions, and they can only be convinced by seeing that their homologs in African countries are actually thriving, and there's quite a lot of them.
No, I definitely agree with you, Emmanuel. Thank you so much. That was a very interesting and necessary contribution. So I'm glad we broke protocol to take that on. So thank you so much. Before Felix literally cuts my mic off, I'm going to quickly honor Serene by allowing him put his final word in, because it's been eager and unmuted for the last 5 minutes. So please, Serene, can I encourage it to be 20 seconds so I don't have to cut you off, so that I can hand back to Felix?
I will go very fast, and grateful to be sharing this panel with Yao, a good friend of mine. But I do not agree with Emmanuel when he talks about connecting only with the local players. I think an international investor wants to get the point of view of international companies that are already on the ground, right? Because they will have the same type of issues. Definitely, it's important to also connect with the local players and understand the all sort of different issues they may face. Then you have basically the point of view, the bigger picture of the situation on the ground. Now, for the communication, quickly, what I would say is it's important maybe to create a platform of communication with the private sector, because the private sector is actually, facing the realities that are really, relevant to the business environment. And it's always different than the policies and all these stories that people are talking about, right? People tend to paint Africa, extremely badly, but the reality on the ground is completely different. We believe in this continent. We keep fighting for the continent, to invest for the continent, and to connect Africa to the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Serene. That was a salient point that you added. As I mentioned earlier, this is not in any form or shape the end of a discussion. This is the beginning of a discussion. So let's not let these discussions end. I'm going to hand back over to Felix. Thank you so much for having me. Again, my name is Tomilayo Aluko, and it's been my pleasure to moderate these panels. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tomi, and all of the interventions today, but I will immediately throw the mic over to Henri Bernard to help us wrap up.
Yes, to thank you all. Thank you very much to Milayo. Thank you to all our panelists and for all of you for attending. Clearly, there's a need to continue linking up economic players, investments, promoters, public sector, policymakers, development cooperation providers, and that's a priority for us and the DEFCOM members. So we look forward to building on this discussion in the months to come. You can already find some great tips on comms on our SDG communicator platform. I'm pretty sure that my colleagues are going to remind you of the link on the chat. I don't know why my video had stopped. Sorry about that. And maybe a couple of last words. One is to remind you that the report by the African Union Commission and the OECD on Africa's development dynamics is on promoting investment in Africa, and you will find it interesting. We will make sure that you have it. And finally, to thank everyone and our friends at Africa Communications Week, in particular, Eniola and Annie, and wish them lots of success for the remaining events in their week. It's their week this time. Finally, wish everyone a great Africa Day tomorrow. I'm sure we'll be reading about each other on social media throughout that day. So thanks again, everybody. Thank you. Thanks to our panelists, Serine, Mark, Yao, everyone. And we'll see you soon on the screen for more discussions and maybe one day for real.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Have a good day, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you, ACW.